Today's reading has to do with the Jewish War in the first century, AD 66 to 73, 7 years divided into two sections of 3.5 years that we have an eyewitness for, and that was General Josephus, who was a general for the Israeli side, but was captured and turned and became not only an adjutant to the General Titus, who destroyed Jerusalem, but also became an adopted son of the General Vespasian, who destroyed the rest of Israel. If it wasn't for Josephus, we wouldn't know much about the first century at all. So here's an excerpted version of some of the things that happened during that important Jewish war. If you listen really closely, you can hear shades of the book of the Revelation of Yahshua HaMashiach, for indeed that's what John is writing about, the Jewish war. More on that later. In the meantime, here's Josephus.
You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents, direct from the Veroesin Yahad, a Hebrew Nation Radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology, and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
Whereas the war that the Jews made against the Romans has been the greatest of all times, while some men who were not concerned themselves have written vain and contradictory stories by hearsay, and while those that were there have given false accounts, I, Joseph, the son of Matthias, by birth a Hebrew, and a priest also, and who at first fought against the Romans myself, and was forced to be present at what was done afterwards, am the author of this book. Now the affairs of the Romans were in great disorder after the death of Nero. At the decease of Herod, Agrippa, his son, who bore the same name, was 17 years old. He was considered too young to bear the burden of royalty, and Judea relapsed into a Roman province. Cuspius Fadus was sent as governor, and administered his office with firmness, but found civil war disturbing the district beyond Jordan. He cleared the country of the robber bands, and his successor, Tiberius Alexander, during a brief rule, put down disturbances that broke out in Judea. The province was at peace till he was superseded by Cumanus, during whose government the people and the Roman soldiery began to show mutual animosity. In a terrible riot, 20,000 people perished, and Jerusalem was given up to wailing and lamentation. It was in Caesarea that the events took place that led to the final war. This magnificent city was inhabited by two races, the Syrian Greeks, who were heathens, and the Jews. The two parties violently contended for the preeminence. The Jews were the more wealthy, but the Roman soldiery, levied chiefly in Syria, took part with their countrymen. Tumults and bloodshed disturbed the streets. At this time, a procurator named Gessius Florus was appointed, and he, by his barbarities, forced the Jews to begin the war in the 12th year of the reign of Nero and the 17th of the reign of Agrippa. But the occasion of the war was by no means proportioned to these heavy calamities that it brought upon us. The fatal flame finally broke out from the old feud at Caesarea. The decree of Nero had assigned the magistracy of the city to the Greeks. It happened that the Jews had a synagogue, the ground around which belonged to a Greek. For this spot the Jews offered a much higher price than it was worth. It was refused, and to annoy them as much as possible, the owner set up some mean buildings and shops upon it, and so made the approach to the synagogue as narrow and difficult as possible. The more impetuous of the Jewish youth interrupted the workmen. Then the men of greater wealth and influence, and among them John, a publican, collected the large sum of 8 talents and sent it as a bribe to Florus, that he might stop the building. He received the money, made great promises, and at once departed for Sabbath from Caesarea. His object was to leave full scope for the riot. On the following day, while the Jews were crowding to the synagogue, a citizen of Caesarea outraged them by oversetting an earthen vessel in the way, over which he sacrificed birds, as done by the law in cleansing lepers, and thus he implied that the Jews were a leprous people. The more violent Jews, furious at the insult, attacked the Greeks who were already in arms. the Jews were worsted, took up the books of the law, and fled to Narbata, about 7 miles distant. John the publican and 12 men of eminence went to Samaria to Florus, implored his aid, and reminded him of the 8 talents he had received. He threw them into prison and demanded 17 talents from the sacred treasury under pretense of Caesar's necessities. This injustice and oppression caused violent excitement in Jerusalem when the news reached that city. The people assembled around the temple with the loudest outcries. But it was the purpose of Florus to drive the people to insurrection, and he gave his soldiers orders to plunder the upper market. Of men, women, and children, there fell that day 3,600. When Agrippa attempted to persuade the people to obey Florus until Caesar should send someone to succeed him, the more seditious cast reproaches on him and got the king excluded from the city. Nay, some had the impudence to fling stones at him. At the same time, they excited the people to go to war, and some laid siege to the Roman garrison in the Antonia. Others made an assault on a certain fortress called Masada. They took it by treachery and slew the Romans. One, Menahem, a Galilean, became leader of the sedition and went to Masada and broke open Herod's armory and gave arms not only to his own people, but to other robbers also. These he made use of for a bodyguard and returned in state to Jerusalem and gave orders to continue the siege of the Antonia. The tower was undermined and fell, and many soldiers were slain. Next day the high priest, Ananias, and his brother Hezekiah were slain by the robbers. By these successes, Menahem was puffed up and became barbarously cruel. But he was slain, as were also the captains under him, in an attack led by Eleazar, a bold youth who was governor of the temple. And now great calamities and slaughters came on the Jews. On the very same day, 2 dreadful massacres happened. In Jerusalem, the Jews fell on Netalus and the band of Roman soldiers whom he commanded after they had made terms and had surrendered. And all were killed except the commander himself, who supplicated for mercy and even agreed to submit to circumcision. On that very day and hour, as though Providence had ordained it, the Greeks in Caesarea rose and slew over 20,000 Jews, and so the city was emptied of its Jewish inhabitants. For Florus caught those who escaped and sent them to the galleys. By this tragedy the whole nation was driven to madness. The Jews rose and laid waste the villages all around many sites in Syria, and they descended on Gadara, Hippo, and Gaulonitis, and burned and destroyed many places. Sebast and Ascalon were seized without resistance, and they razed Anthedon and Gaza to the ground. When thus the disorder in all Syria had become terrible, Cestius Gallus, the Roman commander at Antioch, marched with an army to Ptolemais and overran all Galilee and invested Jerusalem, expecting that it would be surrendered by means of a powerful party within the walls. But the plot was discovered, and the conspirators were flung headlong from the walls, and an attack by Cestius on the north side of the temple was repulsed with great loss. Seeing the whole country around in arms, and the Jews swarming on all the heights, Cestius withdrew his army by night, leaving 400 of his bravest men to mount guard in the camp and to display their ensigns that the Jews might be deceived. But at break of day it was discovered that the camp was deserted by the army, and the Jews rushed to the assault and slew all the Roman band. Nero was at this time in Achaia. To him, Cestius, in order to lay the blame on Florus, sent as ambassadors Costobar and Saul, 2 brothers of the Herodian family, who, with Philip, the son of Joachimus, the general of Agrippa, had escaped from Jerusalem. Meantime, a great massacre of the Jews took place at Damascus. Then those in Jerusalem who had pursued after Cestius called a general assembly in the temple and elected their governors and commanders. Their choice fell on Joseph, the son of Gorion, and Ananias, the chief priest, who were invested with absolute authority in the city. But Eleazar was passed over, for he was suspected of aiming at kingly power as he went about attended by a bodyguard of zealots. But as commanding within the temple, he made himself master of the public treasures, and in a short time the need of money and his extreme subtlety won over the multitude, and all real authority fell into his hands. To the other districts they sent the men most to be trusted for courage and fidelity. Josephus was appointed to the command of Galilee, with particular charge of the strong city of Gamala. He raised in that province in the north an army of more than 100,000 young men, whom he armed and exercised after the Roman manner. And he formed a council of 70 and appointed 7 judges in each city. He sought to unite the people and to win their goodwill, but great trouble arose from the treachery of his enemy, Jan of Giscala, who surpassed all men in craft and deceit. He gathered a force of 4,000 robbers and wasted Galilee, while he inflamed the dissensions in the city and sent messengers to Jerusalem accusing Josephus of tyranny. Tiberius and several cities revolted, but Josephus suppressed the rising, severely punishing many of the leaders. Jan retired to the robbers at Masada and took to plundering Idumea. Nero, on learning from the messengers the state of affairs, at first regarded the revolt lightly, but presently grew alarmed and appointed to the command of the armies in Syria and the task of subduing the Jews to Vespasian, who had pacified the West when it was disordered by the Germans and had also recovered Britain for the Romans. He came to Antioch in the early spring and was there joined by Agrippa and all his forces. He marched to Ptolemais, where he was met by his son Titus, who had, with expedition unusual in the winter season, sailed from Achaia to Alexandria. So the Roman army now numbered 60,000 horsemen and footmen, besides large numbers of camp followers who were also accustomed to military service and could fight on occasion. The war was now open. Josephus attempted no resistance in the open field, and the people had been directed to flee to the fortified cities. The strongest of all these was Jotapata, and here Josephus commanded in person. Being very desirous of demolishing it, Vespasian besieged it with his whole army. It was defended with the greatest vigor, but after fierce conflicts was taken in the 13th year of the reign of Nero, on the first day of the month of Panemus, that is July. During this dreadful siege, and at the capture, 40,000 men fell. The Romans sought in vain for the body of Josephus, their stubborn enemy. He had leaped down the shaft of a dry well, leading to a long cavern. A woman betrayed the hiding place, and Josephus was taken and brought before the Conqueror, of whom he had demanded from his captors a private conference. To Vespasian he announced that he and his son would speedily attain the imperial dignity. Vespasian was conciliated by the speech of his prisoner, whom he treated with kindness, for though he did not release him from his bonds, he bestowed on him suits of clothes and other precious gifts. Joppa, Tiberias, Tarichai, and Gamala were taken, but Romans and Jews perished in their conflict, and by the capture of Giscala, all Galilee was subdued, Jan of Giscala fleeing to Jerusalem. While the cities of Galilee thus arrested the course of the Roman eagles, Jotapata and Gamala setting the example of daring resistance, the leaders of the nation in Jerusalem, instead of sending out armies to the relief of the besieged cities, were engaged in the most dreadful civil conflicts. The fame of Jan of Giscala had gone before him to Jerusalem, and the multitude poured forth to do him honor. He falsely represented the Roman forces as being very greatly weakened, and declared that their engines had been worn out in the sieges in Galilee. He was a man of enticing eloquence, to whom the young men eagerly gave heed. So the city now began to be divided into hostile factions, and the whole of Judea had before set to the people of Jerusalem the fatal example of discord. For every city was torn to pieces by civil animosities. Not only the public councils, but even numerous families were distracted by the peace and war dispute. Through all Judea, the youth were ardent for war, while the elders vainly endeavored to allay the frenzy. Bands of desperate men began to spread over the land, plundering houses, while the Roman garrisons in the towns, rather rejoicing in their hatred to the race than wishing to protect the sufferers, afforded little help. Large numbers of these evil men stole into the city and grew into a daring faction, who robbed houses openly, and many of the most eminent citizens were murdered by these zealots, as they were called, from their pretense that they had discovered a conspiracy to betray the city to the Romans. They dismissed many of the Sanhedrin from office and appointed men of the lowest degree, who would support them in their violence, till the leaders of the people became slaves to their will. At length resistance was provoked, led by Ananus, oldest of the chief priests, a man of great wisdom, and the robber zealots took refuge in the temple and fortified it more strongly than before. They appointed as high priest one Phannias, a coarse and clownish rustic, utterly ignorant of the sacerdotal duties, who when decked in the robes of office caused great derision. This sport and pastime for the zealots caused the more religious people to shed tears of grief and shame, and the citizens, unable to endure such insolence, rose in great numbers to avenge the outrage on the sacred rites. Thus a fierce civil war broke out, in which very many were slain. Then Jan of Giscala, with great treachery, outwardly siding with Ananus and secretly aiding the zealots, sent messengers inviting the Idumeans to come to his help, of whom 20,000 broke into the city during a stormy night and slew 85,000 people. Nero died after having reigned 13 years and 8 days, and Vespasian, being informed of the event, waited for a whole year, holding his army together instead of proceeding against Jerusalem. Galba was made emperor, and then, after the defeat and death of the emperor Vitellius, Vespasian was proclaimed by the east. He had preferred to leave the Jews to waste their strength by their internal feuds, while he sent his lieutenants with forces to reduce various surrounding districts instead of attacking Jerusalem. When he became emperor, he released Josephus from his bonds, honoring him for his integrity. Hastening his journey to Rome, Vespasian commanded Titus to subdue Judea. At Jerusalem were now 3 factions raging furiously. Eleazar, son of Shimon, who was the first cause of the war, by persuading the people to reject the offerings of the emperors to the temple, and had led the zealots and seized the temple, pretended to cherish righteous wrath against Jan of Giscala for the bloodshed he had occasioned. But he deserted the zealots and seized the inner court of the temple, so that there was war between him and Shimon, son of Gioras. Thus Eleazar, Jan, and Shimon each led a band in constant fightings, and the temple was everywhere defiled by murders. Now, as Titus was on his march, he chose out 600 select horsemen, and went to take a view of the city, when suddenly an immense multitude burst forth from the gate over against the monuments of Queen Helena, and intercepting him and a few others. He had on neither helmet nor breastplate, yet though many darts were hurled at him, all missed him, as if by some purpose of providence, and, charging through the midst of his foes, he escaped unhurt. Part of the army now advanced to Scopus, within a mile of the city, while another occupied a station at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Seeing this gathering of the Roman forces, the factions within Jerusalem for the first time felt the necessity for concord, as Eleazar from the summit of the temple, Jan from the porticos of the outer court, and Shimon from the heights of Zion, watched the Roman camps forming thus so near the walls. Making terms with each other, they agreed to make an attack at the same moment. Their followers, rushing suddenly forth along the valley of Jehoshaphat, fell on the 10th Legion, encamped at the foot of the Mount of Olives, and working there unarmed at the entrenchments. The soldiers fell back, many being killed. Witnessing their peril, Titus, with picked troops, fell on the flank of the Jews and drove them into the city with great loss. The Roman commander now carefully pushed forward his approaches, and the army took up a position all along the northern and the western walls, the footmen being drawn up in 7 lines, with the horsemen in 3 lines behind, and the archers between. Jerusalem was fortified by 3 walls. These were not one within the other, for each defended one of the quarters into which the city was divided. The first, or outermost, surrounded Bethzatha. The next protected the citadel of the Antonia and the northern front of the temple, and the third, or old, and the innermost wall was that of Sion. Many towers, 35 feet high and 35 feet broad, each surrounded with lofty chambers and with great tanks for rainwater, guarded the whole circuit of the walls, 90 being in the first wall, 14 in the second, and 60 in the third. The whole circuit of the city was about 33 stadia, that is 4 miles. From their penthouses of wicker, the Romans, with great toil, day and night, discharged arrows and stones, which slew many of the citizens. At 3 different places the battering rams began their thundering work, and at length the corner tower came down, yet the walls stood firm, for there was no breach. Suddenly the besieged sallied forth and set fire to the engines. Titus came up with his horsemen and slew 12 Jews with his own hands. The Jews now retreated to the second wall, abandoning the defense of Bethzatha, which the Romans entered. Titus instantly ordered the second wall to be attacked, and for 5 days the conflict raged more fiercely than ever. The Jews were entirely reckless of their own lives, sacrificing themselves readily if they could kill their foes. On the 5th day, they retreated from the second wall, and Titus entered that part of the lower city that was within it with 1,000 picked men. But being desirous of winning the people, he ordered that no houses should be set on fire, and no massacres should be committed. The seditious, however, slew everyone who spoke of peace, and furiously assailed the Romans. Some fought from the walls, others from the houses, and such confusion prevailed that the Romans retired. Then the Jews, elated, manned the breach, making a wall of their own bodies. Thus the fight continued for 3 days, till Titus a second time entered the wall. He threw down all the northern part and strongly garrisoned the towers of the south, the strong heights of Sion, the citadel of the Antonia, and the fortified temple still held out. Titus, eager to save so magnificent a place, resolved to refrain for a few days from the attack in order that the minds of the besieged might be affected by their woes, and that the slow results of famine might operate. He reviewed his army in full armor, and they received their pay in view of the city, the battlements being thronged by spectators during the splendid defiling, who looked on in terror and dismay. The famine increased, and the misery of the weaker was aggravated by seeing the stronger obtaining food. All natural affection was extinguished. Husbands and wives, parents and children snatching the last morsel from each other. Many wretched men were caught by the Romans prowling in the ravines by night to pick up food, and these were scourged, tortured, and crucified. This was done to terrify the rest, and it went on till there was not wood enough for crosses. Terrible crimes were committed in the city. The aged high priest, Matthias, was accused of holding communication with the enemy. 3 of his sons were killed in his presence, and he was executed in sight of the Romans, together with 16 other members of the Sanhedrin. The famine grew so woeful that a woman devoured the body of her own child. At length, after fierce fighting, the Antonia was scaled, and Titus ordered its demolition. Titus now promised that the temple should be spared if the defenders would come forth and fight in any other place. But Jan and the zealots refused to surrender it. For several days, the outer cloisters and outer courts were attacked with rams, but the intense and compact stones resisted the blows. As many soldiers were slain in seeking to storm the cloisters, Titus ordered the gates to be set on fire, though that night and the next day the flames raged through the cloisters. Then, in order to save the temple itself, he ordered the fire to be quenched. On the 10th of August, the same day of the year on which Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple built by Solomon, the cry was heard that the temple was on fire. The Jews, with cries of grief and rage, grasped their swords and rushed to take revenge on their enemies or perish in the ruins. The slaughter was continued while the fire raged. Soon no part was left but a small portion of the outer cloisters, where 6,000 people had taken refuge, led by a false prophet, who had there promised that Elohim would deliver his people in his temple. The soldiers set the building on fire, and all perished. Titus next spent 18 days in preparations for the attack on the upper city, which was then speedily captured. And now the Romans were not disposed to display any mercy, night alone putting an end to the carnage. During the whole of this siege of Jerusalem, 1,100,000 were slain, and the prisoners numbered 97,000. To end this story, let me add the aftermath. The Romans laid the city bare. Bodies were stacked like cords of firewood. Everyone fell by the sword or fire. General Titus commanded his legions not to destroy or burn the temple, but they disobeyed and set it ablaze. Hundreds of Levites ran into the burning temple rather than become Roman casualties. It was so hot in there that the millions of pounds of silver and gold melted. The precious metal liquefied and ran like water out of the cracks in the stone. Soldiers pried these massive stones apart for the boiling loot. When the Romans were finished, the temple, its money, and all inside were totally annihilated. An eyewitness tells the incredible story about one of the Levitical priests. When the smoke had risen in thick columns and the flames leapt through the roof of the grand structure, one of the priests climbed to the top of the highest temple tower with the key to the holy place in his hand. Atop the pinnacle of the temple, in smoke and flames, he held the key high and cried, "Yahweh, if you do no longer judge us worthy to run your house, take the key back." A giant hand descended out of the clouds of smoke and took away the key as the priest succumbed to the flames. Hello, this is Jackson Snyder. We're going to take a little break now to present some very important messages, but we will be right back. Wisdom.
Next is a reading from a 9th or 10th century text entitled The Wars of Yahweh. It's written by a noted Karaite as a satire against the rabbinical authorities receiving the oral Torah as not only on par with the written Torah, but perfect. And if you know anything about the pillars of the rabbinical Jewish movement, you'll be able to understand in the second part of this talk sharp points of sarcastic humor. The Wars of Yahweh.
The Book of the Wars of Yahweh by Salman ben Jeruham. Canto 1. To you I call, O men, hearken to my explicit words, reinforced, clad, enveloped, and robed, with proofs as solid as onyx and sapphire. When I was at the age of vanity, I did search for the right road for my course, that I might learn, as well as teach in the midst of my congregation, and I sought to clear the stones from my path. I was a stranger in a foreign land, investigating and searching the ways of the Torah, and I saw in the midst of the congregation a man devoid of a good heart and straying away from justice. He bent his bow to write complaints, and to remonstrate in all languages, to tear up improved roads, and to pervert with nonsense and trifles the highway of understanding. I understood his purpose, and was overcome with apprehension, and my wrath was kindled like a burning fire, and I was seized with zeal for the sons of Yehuda, and for the Almighty, and for the book of the testimony. And I was afraid of the day of judgment and retribution, lest his wrath should burn with anger. Therefore I composed a double rejoinder against him, in the language of Heber, and also in that of the sons of Dumah. This will be my consolation in my exile, that there are learned men to investigate my words fairly, who will know that I speak out of zeal for Elohim, so that the men of my congregation might not be led astray. He stated in his misleading discourse, and he did utter the assertion, that the Almighty chose to reveal himself to Moses at Mount Sinai to give him 2 laws for his chosen people. The commandments of the one law were set down in writing, while the commandments of the other were kept upon the tongue. Moreover, they were both to be, into everlasting eternity, an heirloom for the congregation of the seed of the perfect ones. My spirit advised me to reply to him in this manner, and to place my answer among my congregation in a written epistle, in order to remove the stumbling block and to clear the path of stones, so that the flock of Israel would not go astray into the waterless desert of heresy, but rather that they would study it attentively, so that my congregation might not be seduced by what is hidden from them. And I hope that as my reward, El Elyon will let me behold his good tidings in Sion. We believe firmly that the written law was in truth given to Israel by the right hand of the Almighty, according to the testimony of the whole congregation of the Lily, who were scattered in every land. All of them, believers as well as unbelievers, divided as they are by language and tongue, all Israel, from the east to the westernmost ends of the world, testify to the sanctity of the written law, all of them, the little and the great. This testimony has become firmly established in their midst, by their united and universal consent, without challenge. Likewise, the signs and miracles that the dweller of the heavenly abode has wrought are written therein, and are explained for them who wish to understand. Selah. They remember the splitting asunder of the Red Sea, and they do not deny the words spoken by the Almighty on Mount Sinai. And with their mouths they sing of the esteem of the Torah and of the other miracles. Israel and all other nations speak of this as one. Now if Israel and Yehuda are all united concerning the validity of the oral law, which is, as they say, perfect, let them offer their testimony, and let their voices be heard. If not, then the Phaeumite's words are void, and his tongue has been silenced. I will begin here with another argument that I will mention now without delay, and I will ask and demand a reply to it from everyone who holds to the oral law and has given his preference to it. You say that the rock has given Israel 2 laws, one of which is written and one of which was preserved in your mouths. If this is as you say, then indeed your deeds are but falsehood and rebellion against Elohim. The Holy One has given you an oral law, so that you would recite it orally, For, say you, he has deemed it in his wisdom a laudable command. Why then did you write it down in ornate script? Had the merciful one wished to write it down, he would have had it written down by Moses. Now, did he not give it to you to be studied orally, and had he not ordained it not be inscribed in a book? Yet they altered the alleged words of Elohim and wrote them down. And instead of studying the book orally, they transferred it into writing. How then can their words be believed, seeing that they have offended grievously? They cannot withdraw from his contradictory path. They wrote down both laws, thus condemning the commandment of the Almighty. Where then is the oral law in which they place their trust? Their words have become void and meaningless, and out of their own mouths have they testified that they have drawn Elohim's wrath upon themselves. Canto 2. I have discovered in my heart another argument, a handsome one, and majestic enough to be placed as a crown for the assembly, to be their ornament, pride, and glory. I have looked again into the 6 divisions of the Mishnah, and behold, they represent the words of modern men. There are no majestic signs of miracles in them, and they lack the formula. And Yahweh spoke unto Moses and unto Aaron. I therefore put them aside, and I said, there is no true law in them, for the law is set forth in a different manner, in a majestic display of prophets, of signs, of miracles. Yet all this majestic beauty we do not see in the whole Mishnah. I have seen an end to every human purpose, but there's no end to the speaking about the majesty of his ordinance and utterance. Blessed by the Creator of what is below and what is above, and may his blessing rest upon his people, Selah. I am young in days, and you are older than I. Had not the blackguard intruded among the scholars, I would never have written this epistle. I have turned again to my first argument, to fortify it with truth and uprightness without falsehood, and with might and power, like the power of Samson. However, the best answer of the tongue is from Yahweh. I have set the 6 divisions of the Mishnah before me, and I looked at them carefully with mine eyes, and I saw that they are very contradictory in content. This one Mishnaic scholar declares a thing to be forbidden to the people of Israel, while the other declares it to be permitted. So my thought answer me, and most of my reflections declare unto me, that there is in it no law of logic, nor the law of Moses the wise. I said, perhaps one of the two did not know the right way, wherefore he did not know how to reason it out with his companion. Perhaps the truth lies with his companion. Let me look into his words. Perchance I will find relief from my perplexity. But instead, I found there other men. Sometimes they say, others say, while anon the scholars issue a decision, agreeing neither with the one nor with the other, but contradicting both. Had I been among them, I say, had I been among them, I would not have accepted the words of these others and scholars. Rather, would I have weighted the words of Yahweh with them, and I would have judged accordingly every word that they had contrived. Gird thyself with thy strength and hearken, and step up to me, and let the scholars of my congregation of Israel judge between us. And let them place our words upon the scale, so that I might walk in truth upon the road of my life's course. Know that there is no difference in learning between them and me. When they say, Rabbi so-and-so said thus and so, I answer and say, I too am the learned so-and-so. Thine escape has been cut off by this argument. Else answer me, if thou canst. His heart is overlaid with stupidity as with fat, and I know well what he says and speaks, and he has set it forth in his written scroll. Therefore will I turn my face toward him and do battle with him, and I will shake his loins and strike down his sword. He has written that the 6 divisions of the Mishnah are as authoritative as the law of Moses, and that they wrote it down so that it would not be forgotten. I will answer him concerning this, for I will not be silent, lest the blackguard think that he has uttered an unanswerable argument. He who remembers forgotten things and knows what is hidden, had he deemed it proper to have them skillfully written down, in order that they might not be forgotten upon the earth, he would have offered his servant Moses to inscribe them, with the might and power, in a book. It is proper for men like us, who have none of the Holy Spirit in us, to turn the oral law into a written law by writing it down. Why would it not be right for us to turn the written law into a law preserved only in our mouths? Hearken unto me, and I will speak further. If you would say, this took place in the days of the prophets and in the days of Ezra. Why is there no mention of it in these prophets? Why the same manner as the names of the prophets are recorded throughout Scripture? Be silent, and I will teach thee wisdom. If it be thy desire to learn wisdom, it is written, the law of Yahweh is perfect. What profit be there for us, then, in the written Mishnah? Moreover, if the Talmud originated with our master Moses, what profit is there for us in another view? And what can a third and a fourth view teach us when they tell us first that the interpretation of this problem in law is thus and so, and then proceed to explain it with another view? The truth stands upon one view only, for this is so in the wisdom of all mankind, and right counsel cannot be based upon two contradictory things. Now, in this one, he has fallen down and cannot stand up. If the Talmud is composed of the words of the prophets, why are contradictory views found in it? Now it is evident that this view of Saadia is foolishness, and the words of fools, so testify all mankind. Canto 3. Where do you flee, O Fayumite, to hide yourself from utter ruin? Let us rather come together for judgment. Increase thine army of arguments and come out for battle. I have seen also in the Talmud, which you Rabbinites regard as if it were your main supporting column, and which is made by you a partner to the law of Moses, and is held beloved and desirable in your hearts, the bellowing of the school of Shammai against the school of Hillel, to controvert their words, as well as that of the school of Hillel against the school of Shammai, to refute their interpretations of the law. This one invokes blessing, and that one heaps curses upon their heads, yet both are an abomination in the sight of Yahweh. The words of which one of the two shall we accept, and the view of which one of the two shall we condemn, seeing that each of them has attracted a great congregation of adherents, and each of them turns to say, I am the captain of the ship. Incline your ears if you desire pearls of wisdom. The matter can't be both ways. If their words require interpretation with words of men understanding, then this Mishnah cannot be the law of the master of masters. If the Mishnah be the law of Moses, the servant of Elohim, why do they not mention there in the name of Moses only? And why do they mention in each chapter of the Mishnah the names of teachers other than he? And why do they not say, thus says Yahweh, and thus says Moses, after his meeting with Yahweh? If you would yet double your rascalities, and would utter more error and falsehood, and would say, they used to engage in scholarly discussion in awe of him who dwells in glory, remember that many fell slain among them in their stumbling. Elohim forbid that I should remain silent. Rather will I establish the strongest proofs in the world, and I will refute thee and spoil thee of thy claims, with the help of him who causes men to become rich as well as poor. Refutation of the 7 arguments. The text of the 7 arguments that are set down in your commentary on Genesis, if at all times you did mention them publicly in order to seduce men's hearts, yet now they will become like spears and swords over the head and heart. May your steps be hampered in walking, when you say that in my congregation has need of the Mishnah, in order to know the precise measurements of the ordinances of the ritual fringe, the lulav, and the booth, and that this is why they arranged it and set it down in writing. You have written lies, for not all ordinances have a definite measurement, and that is why the length of the fringe is not specified in the law. If one should forcefully exhibit this argument, how will you distinguish, and what answer will you make to him out of the words of the divine testimony? To heap up more lying words, you have written and set forth further, and have said, secondly, that the Mishnah is ancient, because it has explained the precise amount of the heave offering, so that Israel might know what part of the amount they are to give. This argument is identical with the preceding, and the answer to the former argument applies to the latter as well. No precise amount or sum has been specified for it. Rather, each person is to give as much as he wishes and will meet with no complaint. You have said, thirdly, that we have need for the inherited tradition in order that we might know what day of the week is Sabbath, so that we might keep it holy. But the Sabbath is known to all the inhabitants of the world as a day of rest, from the factual knowledge and reasoning, not merely from reckoning by 3, 5, and 6. You've turned from the right road and labored much. when you have said, fourthly, that we need the Mishnah to know which vessel is capable of becoming ritually unclean, but you have erred, for you have not considered the verse, whatsoever vessel it be, wherewith any work is done. All such vessels are specified in the law, if you would but turn your heart to it. Still you hold fast to broken arguments, and have said, fifthly, that there are ordinances that we must observe, and that are not explained in the law, such as prayers and other ordinances, yet the prayers are not mentioned in Scripture. Your mouth has not considered the verse, and ye shall pray unto me. And prayers are mentioned also in many other places. Thus you have not remembered, when you have spoken, the prayer of Daniel, the man greatly honored and beloved of Elohim. Therefore I reject from before me all ordinances and statutes that are not written in the law. Your flag fell from your bastion. When you have said, sixthly, that we are in need of the tradition and pride ourselves upon it, in order to know the number of years elapsed since the destruction and cessation of the second temple, I will answer you in this manner, and your glory will wilt. O you who bind us together silly things without wisdom, in which sacred book is it written that it is our duty to know the reckoning of how many years will elapse between the destruction of the temple and the dread gathering? With much labor, but uselessly, you have written, seventhly, and have said that we need the traditions and pride ourselves upon them to know the date of the period of the redemption of Israel and the appointed time of the resurrection of the dead. In the songs of the prophets and other seers, all these things are already mentioned and are contained therein. They are bound and fastened therein as firmly as with ropes, and they do not follow from thy works and your worthless traditions.
We'll end up this session with a sacred name song that I wrote myself based on Psalm 120. It's really a musical sketch of David on the run through the sand dunes of Arabia with only Elohim to help him. I stand for peace, but they are for war.
stand for peace, but they are for war. I speak for peace, but war is all the more. My soul has dwelt with him who longs for war. So deliver me from my dwelling in the sands, from the tongue and its demands, from the mighty's bloody hands, to your peaceful Beulah lands.
for that wild and craven beast. His war will never cease, but I stand for peace. So deliver me from my dwelling in the sands, from the tongue and its demands, from the mighty's bloody hands, to your peaceful Beulah lands. For that wild and craven beast, its war will never cease, but I stand for peace. When I was troubled, I called upon Yahweh. When I was troubled, He heard my plea. When tongues were lying, I called upon Yahweh. He heard me calling and delivered me. I was in Meshach, I called upon Yahweh. I was in Kedar, He heard my plea. I was in bondage, I called upon Yahweh. He heard me calling and He rescued me. I was dwelling there among my enemies, among the men of battle, warlike men of lying lips, among deceitful men of war. I worked for peace. I tell you, they were enemies of peace and enemies of Israel. I was in battle, I called upon Yahweh. I was outnumbered, He saw my fleas. I was imprisoned, I called upon Yahweh. He heard me calling and He gave me peace. Sharp arrows grazed me, I called upon Yahweh. Red hot in charcoal, oh let me be. I will ascend now and try to find Yahweh. He saw me climbing and He came to me. I was dwelling there among my enemies, among the men of battle, warlike men of lying lips, among deceitful men of war. I work for peace. I tell you, they were enemies of peace and enemies of Israel. I am a seeker of Yahweh, and I stand for peace.
This is your host. Thank you for listening. I hope you have enjoyed our variety show, Jackson Snyder Presents. This is a presentation of the Vero Essene Yahad in Vero Beach, Florida. If you would like more information about today's broadcast, email jackson@HebrewNation.net or visit HebrewNationOnline.com. Until we meet again, may Yahweh keep you safe and close to home.